Welcome, everybody. This is our second day of the LS-PAC Models 2021 Diversity in STEM Conference. Glad to see a lot of folks back for the second day. We're very excited about our sessions today. We've got several great sessions. First and foremost is the one that we will have in just a few minutes from Dr. John Matsui. We also have a networking session with the National Association of LS-AMP alumni. That will be at 11:30. We have our student resource fair. That will be directly following this talk in the resource fair hall. We have our beta testing for our app, which is going to be later this afternoon at 1:15. And then we have another talk by Dr. Warner, which you will not want to miss at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And those are all Central Time. And then the very last thing we'll do today at the end at 4 p.m. Central is to announce our Student Presentation Award winners. So stick around for that. I do want to also let you all know about the video chat function, because this is a very useful function, and it will be useful if you are a student who is visiting the resource fair. It will be useful to chat with the booth reps. And so I will share my screen to show you how to use the function. So in this conference environment here, on the bottom bar, you see attendees, and you can click that and you can see all of the attendees who are currently in the conference site, and I can chat with anyone. And I can, if I want to chat with somebody, I can just click the green chat bubble and it brings up a chat window in the lower right-hand corner. And I can text chat, but I can also send a video chat by hitting Start Video Chat. So that's a way you can start a video chat with anybody in the conference. If you want to do this when you go to a booth, I'm going to go over to the resource fair here. I'm just going to click on the first booth, and you'll see up here, there's a gray bar. It says representatives from University of Alabama. And I can go to Jamie's chat bubble and chat with him. He's a representative for this booth. And then I can hit Start Video Chat. That would be a private video chat between you and this person. This booth has a public chat, a group chat. It's not a public video chat, but it's a public text chat. So anything you type in here, all attendees in the booth would be able to see. Okay. So this morning, we have a great guest, a great speaker, Dr. John Matsui. And Dr. Matsui is the co-founder and director of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute funded Biology Scholars Program. The Biology Scholars Program is an equity and inclusion program in the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of California, Berkeley. And Dr. Matsui has worked over the past 29 years with over 3,600 Berkeley undergraduates, 80% low income or first to college, 70% women, and 60% underrepresented ethnic minorities pursuing biology degrees and related careers. The Biology Scholars Program members enter Berkeley with lower SATs and high school GPAs than biology majors at large, but they graduate with biology degrees in equal percentages and with equivalent exit GPAs. And Dr. Matsui has received the National Science Foundation PAESMEM Award, that's the Presidential Mentoring Award, from President Obama in 2015. So we're very excited to have Dr. Matsui. And Dr. Matsui, I'll let you have the floor.
Robert, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. And here we go. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Robert and team, for organizing this conference. I was just talking to Robert before all of you came on, and I was just saying what a challenge it is to be the organizer. I mean, there's always something going on, something that needs your attention, and especially in this new environment, in this virtual environment that we've all spent the last year and a half learning. So thank you, Robert, and colleagues. What I'm going to be talking about today is the role that our diversity centers and programs can play in terms of addressing the underrepresentation problem. And so you could see the title there. And I'm gonna be walking you through sort of maybe in a way my personal history around this work. And maybe you'll have a better understanding of why I've chosen to do this. So I'm going to begin first with my background and history. I'm going to then talk about programs and centers. I'm a program guy. And so I'm speaking from more than 30 years of experience working with programs, and the image of bottled water there will become clear to you when I reach this section. I'll then segue into talking about BSP, or the Biology Scholars Program, and then talk about the future. And again, this grill of this Ford Mustang, the meaning of that will become clear to you as I talk about future directions for all of us who are involved with, either as students or as professionals, with centers and programs designed to increase equity and inclusion in STEM. So let me begin with my background, my personal story. I can't really see hands. I'm working from a very small screen right now, but this date is the date, and this was before I was born. This date has strong personal meaning for me and my family and hundreds of thousands of others of Japanese American descent. This was the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese on December 7th, 1941. And here you see the headlines in the Honolulu Star Bulletin. And so Pearl Harbor was bombed, and the result of all of this was that my family on both sides were interned along with many hundreds, along with 110,000 Japanese Americans. Executive Order 9066 said that irrespective of citizenship, irrespective of loyalties and allegiances, irrespective of personal hardships and financial devastation, Japanese Americans were going to be interned. And on both sides of my family, my mom and dad's families were interned. My dad fought in the war, of course, on the American side, and after the war, families had to start over. And it was then that I was born, and I didn't realize the impact that that this event had on me. But in fact, in thinking back about why I've chosen to do this work, why I've chosen to be committed to, both personally and professionally, the equity and inclusion of all individuals in STEM is captured by this phrase, professional is personal. That is, our professional choices, what we choose to do for a career, is informed by our own personal experiences. And growing up Japanese in California after the war, I was born after the war, really shaped my feeling and my understanding of what it means to be an outsider. I was denied for good reason, access to my culture, my heritage. My parents wanted to raise me as a real American. And so I did not grow up speaking Japanese. I spoke English only. And in many ways, I divested myself before realizing what was going on of my cultural heritage. And this really, really shaped my perspective on my place or my lack of a place in the US society. And in fact, I wrote a little bit about this in the article that that I provided you, that Robert posted. And it's called Outsiders at the Table. And this is a perspective view of the biology scholars program at UC Berkeley. And just realizing my history, in hindsight, I have always been an outsider. I've never felt um, that I had a real place at the table, even in academia. I always feel like both a participant and an observer. And this idea that professional is personal, I bring this with me, this perspective, this lens with me to my work with students who have also been marginalized, who also come from the outside and are really deserving of, yet deprived of, the opportunity to have a place at the academic and professional table. And so let's move on to programs and centers. Again, this imagery will become clear why I chose it in a few minutes. So the context of our work, and by context, I'm talking about the culture of STEM. And what I've done is I've chosen to use the words of colleagues at Berkeley and some of my colleagues across the country. And maybe some of these expressions of belief and attitudes and sort of politics and mindsets will resonate with you. And so around selection, that is around selecting who should be at the table, who should participate in STEM. I was told when I first started the Biology Scholars Program nearly 30 years ago, we had just gotten our first grant from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And I was taken aside by one of my senior colleagues in the department, and I was told this: don't waste your time and talent on a feel-good program for students who don't belong here in the first place. What are these outsiders doing at the table? Was his point. And he had good intentions, but underlying those good intentions were all sorts of assumptions about who was qualified, about success, about where these individuals, including myself, were coming from. And so this expression around who should be at the table, I think, is aptly captured by what he said to me some 30 years ago. In the laboratory, one of my students, African-American male, got funding to do research in a biology lab. And he was really, really excited. He had not had prior experience before. And so he went to the lab to introduce himself to the PI. And this is what the PI told my student: "This is science. Leave your culture at the door." Oh my gosh. There's so much to this statement. The fact that the PI is blind to the fact that he has brought his culture into the laboratory, and that culture had shaped the atmosphere, the climate, the culture of the lab. And my question is, would he have said, would the PI have said the very same thing had my student been Asian or white? My guess is probably not. Leave yourself at the door. Leave all that you are. Leave your background, your history, your community, your family at the door, because this is science. In terms of advising, one of my students was told this after an advisor was reviewing her transcript. With C's in general and first semester organic chemistry, you need to be realistic about your chances for success in a STEM major and career. Oh my gosh, based on 2 data points, 2 grades early on in my student's academic history at Cal, this advisor was telling my student that she should leave STEM and give up her hopes and dreams about having a STEM-related career. That is bad science. 2 data points, not knowing the story behind those C's, the fact the fact that my student, the last time she had chemistry was in the 10th grade. The instructor read out of the book, and that the gap between her preparation and the expectation of UC Berkeley was great. Yet she got C's, an amazing, amazing situation. And to top it all off, she was on financial aid and didn't receive her financial aid check until the 5th week of class. And she was doing general chemistry without a textbook. An amazing performance. And that same advisor concluded by saying to her, "You may like science, but science does not like you." A damaging agreement toward my student. And so, who has a place at the table? Based on which criteria? Who is qualified? Those are the questions. In terms of teaching, I was sitting in this teaching pedagogy seminar for STEM faculty. And the question was posed to all of us: what are you doing to address the demographic shifts in who's in your science classrooms? Immediately, the person to my left raised his hand and said the following: "I teach science, I don't teach students." Oh my goodness. They're there to learn. And no matter how I teach, they better learn it, because if they can't understand what I'm teaching, they don't belong in my classroom. Oh my goodness. This is the culture, at least among some of my colleagues in STEM. Testing. When asked about testing in this very same seminar and asked what makes for a good test, how do you know if you've made one? My colleague, another colleague said, "How do I know if I've made a good test? Simple, I get a curve." Is that what testing should be all about? Should it be more about allocation than education? That's the culture of STEM. And in terms of competition, competition is a fact of life, said one of my colleagues. The cream will rise to the top. I take issue with that portrayal, that analogy. Not everyone is meant to be a scientist. You either have it or you don't. And in terms of the solution, what's the solution to underrepresentation? If we'd admit the right students, there'd be no problem. Okay, there's nothing wrong with us. The problem resides in, is situated in our students. We've just got the wrong students at the table. Okay, kind of a bleak and challenging picture. Of course, it's not uniform or homogeneous. There are islands of hope in the STEM culture, but by and large, this is what's reported by many of our students and also by any number of studies on what needs to be fixed in STEM. And so I talk about undervaluing. Like our students, our programs and centers, or our PCs, are undervalued. Our programs and centers are undervalued. Our focus, of course, is our students. And the value of our work is defined in terms of their success. Okay, that's great. But that's not our whole story or value. In fact, I think that for the longest time, I viewed, when I first started the Biology Scholars Program, I viewed the value of BSP, the Biology Scholars Program, as being of value to the students, not really fully realizing how limiting that self-view or that identity really was. Very much like student services, our programs and centers are designed to offset the effects of an educational system not designed with our students in mind. I think many of us would agree with that statement. And although our programs and centers are located on the academic side, many of these programs funded by NIH, NSF, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and so on, are on the academic side of the house. Their value and design are viewed as relevant for special student populations only. That is, our students from marginalized groups, and are not viewed as valuable to all students, or in quotes, and I put this in quotes, the traditional students who have historically, who come from backgrounds that historically have succeeded at our colleges and universities. So it's incumbent upon us to reframe the narrative around our programs and centers. Our work really is relevant. It's of value to all STEM students, but most especially those from backgrounds historically excluded in STEM. And so let me talk about the Biology Scholars Program, or BSP. Here's the website for BSP. I won't go to it if you do have the time. It's a website that one of the people on the Zoom, Ann Trapaga, who's the communications person for the Biology Scholars Program, has been working really, really hard on. BSP began in 1992. I co-founded this with my colleague, Caroline Kane, in molecular and cell biology. She's now Professor Emerita. And coincidentally, science had a special edition on the pipeline problem, minorities in science. And I take issue with the visual representation of the pipeline problem for any number of reasons that we need not go into right here. But this special edition was coincidental with the founding of BSP. So what is the Biology Scholars Program? Its funding has come from grants primarily, from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, from NIH, and other foundations. We also have a small endowment, and also UC Berkeley has provided us with funding as well. The goal of the program is really important, and just to be really clear, the goal is to enlarge and diversify the pool of students who succeed in biology majors and careers, not skimming talent, but developing talent and enlarging the pool of students who are successful in biology. In terms of its members, we've had over 3,600 Berkeley undergraduates participate since '92. We've had 3,200 graduates. 60% of them have come from underrepresented ethnic minority groups, 70% have been women, 80% have been first to college and or low income, and most are interested in health careers. In terms of success, if we compare underrepresented minority students in BSP versus non-BSP majority students, we see the following. My students enter Berkeley with lower SATs and high school GPAs. We do not skim. As I will talk about shortly, we look to develop talent. We look for potential. And yet they graduate in biology majors in the same percentages and with nearly equivalent exit UC GPAs. And in terms of the cost of the program, we're talking about $2,300 per student per year. There are about 400 members in the program at any given time. 100 new members enter and 100 graduate each year. So in terms of selection, how do we select our student? What does BSP look for? Our selection criteria are maybe a little different than some programs. We look for distance traveled. That is, how far have students traveled in their life's journey in order to be at Berkeley? What barriers have they encountered? Where did they start? We're looking for passion for science, of course. They're joining the Biology Scholars Program, a passion for science. We're also looking for a demonstrated commitment to service that is not just their own success, but a commitment to the success of others and the well-being of others in their surroundings. We have no SAT or high school GPA threshold, and we look for the potential to succeed versus success to date. We have a search image for an alternative set of predictors of success. And these are non-cognitive variables. These are sort of the things that really are oftentimes hard to measure, but we look for those. We look for resilience. We look for persistence in the face of defeat. We look for authenticity, how real they are in terms of what they tell us about themselves, where they want to go, where they've been. A willingness to give and seek help, and also the ability to regroup in the face of failure. What does this result in? This results in a population of BSP members that look very different than those people intending at Berkeley to major in biology. And we see here, the gray represents all the intended biology majors entering as freshmen, and the dark blue represents BSP participants. And you can see for yourself that we overselect for women, URMs, first to college students, and also lower SAT scores, and also lower high school GPAs. It's a very unusual population to find in STEM, and our search image I've already explained, and we're looking for the potential to succeed. In terms of ethnic breakdown, we see in the circle, we see the breakdown of in our 2019-2020 BSP membership. In terms of Hispanic or Latinx, about 50% of our students come from that background. And you can see relative to California, it has a 38% Latinx demographic, and at UC Berkeley, 14%. So you can see that we've over-selected for Latinx students. For African American students, you can see the same. And also for Native American and Alaskan Natives, you can see that we're about parity with California. I show this image right here because I analogize BSP to the Oakland A's. And for those of you that follow baseball and the story of the Oakland A's, there's a story called Moneyball written by Michael Lewis. And the Oakland A's, like BSP, identify undervalued players, undervalued talent, and develop that talent such that that talent is then desired by, in the case of the A's, by the New York Yankees, and for BSP, by graduate and professional schools across the country. In terms of our treatment, the program components include the following. Nothing new about this, we have the list, but the devil is in the implementation and our philosophy of help. We have a strength-based versus a deficit-based approach. We look at what students bring versus what they don't have. We coach versus save or fix. That is, we don't play the game for them, we coach them. We're not trying to save them or fix them because they're not broken. What we try to do is we try to help them fully express their potential. We have a shared responsibility in the success, and students make choices. We don't say, do as I say, but we provide them with opportunities and information, and they choose. And some of them are in a very different clock. They take longer. They take longer before they enter research. They take longer before they graduate, but they leave, and they leave strong. In terms of student success, if we take a look at the following, graduating with a biology degree, declaring a degree before that, and also graduating with a GPA 3.0 or higher. These are real measures of persistence and success. And the question is, where do students from different groups leave the path? Here we have, in this graph right here, we have a persistence graph. Starting off as freshmen at 100% of the cohort, we see the gray line represents UC Berkeley, all UC Berkeley freshmen. The dark blue line represents underrepresented minorities in BSP, and underrepresented by minorities not in BSP is represented by the light blue line. And you can see on the x-axis going from intended biomajor to declared biomajor to graduating with a biology degree and a high GPA, meaning 3.0 or higher, you can see this downward slope. And so we can see that BSP does make a difference. There is a 31-point gap here between URMs outside of the program and all biomajors. And at this point right here, graduating with a high GPA, there's a 30-point gap. But for BSP, the gap is much more narrow. So the persistence summary is that persistence in biology varies greatly by group. BSP almost eliminates the equity gap in terms of earning degrees and GPA at graduation. And it does so by eliminating equity gaps in course completion, all the prerequisites to be a major. And without BSP, we've calculated that members would be 45% less likely to complete a bio degree than students more prepared to succeed in science at Berkeley. Well, why does BSP work? A colleague of mine, Mika Estrella, who's a social psychologist at UC San Francisco, did a study, a prospective study. She actually in real time polled students, about 400 BSP members over 2 years. And this was called the Gifted Forward study. Our working hypothesis was that BSP provides a safe space that reduces the ambiguity about belonging in biology at Berkeley for its members. And here's what we found. Positive interactions with BSP staff around advising, social events, et cetera, help members increase their confidence in their ability to do science. They can do it. Science efficacy. Their perception of themselves as scientists, science identity. They increased their affirmation of the values, the scientific values of the community, science values, and all of this combined helped them maintain their intentions to pursue biology. And all of these things have been found to be correlated with long-term success and persistence in STEM. And our paper is going to be coming out shortly in CBE Life Sciences. And keep your eye out for that. So going to the future. And again, this grill of this Ford Mustang will become clear. This imagery will become clear in a second. So to summarize, there have been 40 years of work to diversify STEM. Billions of dollars have been spent on this effort. Programs and centers have been at the heart of the effort to do this. They've been the interventions of choice. And what's the result been? Chronic underrepresentation of URMs, of women, of low income and first to college individuals in STEM. So at first it really seems like we've not done our jobs, but maybe we should look at our job in a different way. And let's take a step back and take a look at how we respond to various crises. And maybe this will give us a better idea about maybe how we should be thinking about our roles differently. We're all familiar with the lead in the water in Flint, Michigan. In fact, the settlement for the lawsuit about lead in water in Flint, the outcomes have been announced today. But the problem is that rather than addressing the real infrastructure problem, the political problem, the bias in the infrastructure that led to the poor quality and high lead content of the drinking water, instead of doing that, what they did was they provided the Flint citizens with bottled water. It was the bottled water response. That's a first order response, leaving the infrastructure in place. In California, as you know, we've been having another type of crisis. We've been having wildfires. And here you see an example of that last year, and it's probably going to happen this year. PG&E, our electric provider, was responsible for many of these fires. So instead of investing in infrastructure, which they say they will do, what they had us do, the bottled water response, was to simply shut down the electricity during high wind events, thus preventing wildfires. Again, a first order response to crisis. The pipeline problem is another crisis that we've been talking about here. Our first order response was to provide centers and programs to deal with a problem that is really an infrastructure problem. And so in all of these cases, bottled water has been our first order response to crisis. It's been the bottled water response. And I call this program 1.0, the bottled water response, where programs and centers are charged with the impossible task of righting the wrongs of institutional and systemic inequities in STEM. Programs and centers have been workarounds, while these institutional inequities have remained in place over the last 40 years. So what should we do? The vision of what's possible is often limited by what's familiar and available. And when Henry Ford first started making cars, he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. In other words, horses is what they knew. And faster horses would probably have been what they wanted instead of the automobile. So the use of programs and centers, we have been the workhorse to diversify STEM. Our work has been timeless and yet dated. And the question is why? We've always done it that way over the last 40 years, and yet STEM underrepresentation persists. We need to transition. We have one foot on the dock of program 1.0, and the future is fast pulling away from us. We need to think different. And here is an image that some of you are going to recognize. And this is something that I would have you, if you can, identify. What are these? Some of us are of the age that we do recognize these. That's the way we used to play our music, the 8-track. And we used to play our music on these machines, these huge machines that would accommodate the 8-track. But today, of course, we have the MP3s. Things have changed in the way we listen to our music, but not in the way we think about diversifying STEM. We need an upgrade, an update on our E&I thinking. We need to recognize that underrepresentation and achievement gaps are not the problem. And in fact, they're rather a symptom of the problem, with the problem being our systems. Our systems are practices, policies, and attitudes that produce these results, these gaps. The solution is to fix our institutions and not our students. And we, as centers and programs, are well positioned to change our institutions because we have decades of collective experience and data around helping students navigate in an equitable and broken system. And I call this Program 2.0, where programs and centers can be re-envisioned as incubators to develop approaches around advising, teaching, and mentoring that do close equity gaps. That's what we've been doing over all these years. And we can help institutions discover models that can be scaled and adapted and sustained to support all students, most especially those from underrepresented groups. Now, there have been a number of institutional change initiatives, and I'm going to focus on the last two. HHMI has a Program 2.0 approach. It's called Inclusive Excellence, where the focus is to build institutional capacity to support excellence from students from all backgrounds. Right now, this is a national experiment. The 2017 and 2018 grantees, there were 57 institutions that have been given $1 million apiece to change their institutions over 5 years. A relatively small amount of money and a relatively short amount of time. It's a huge uphill battle. But I've been doing my Program 2.0 work at UC Berkeley. I did an experiment, a project over the last 5 years called Expanding Undergraduate Success in STEM, or EUSS. I was funded by HHMI to scale and adapt the BSP approach campus-wide. And the focus was improving advising, mentoring, and teaching for all STEM majors, but most especially those from marginalized groups. From 2015 to 2020, I held working groups, workshops, and conferences. And as a follow-up, to take a look at the impact of my work over those 4 years, HHMI provided us with a follow-up grant called to conduct a real change study to see to what extent the institutional changes have happened as a result of BSP and as a result of my work over the last 4 years. And so what are the lessons learned? What are the lessons learned? I want to leave some time for questions. In terms of lessons learned, our programs and centers have been workarounds to institutional inequities for decades. Our charge, our focus has been students, and the institution has conducted business as usual. But we have the potential to disrupt institutional culture. We need champions to do this disruption. Any efforts that we make need to take into consideration campus initiatives so that we can get the support, both political and funds from upper administration to initiate institutional change. An important question is which model of program, which model of center should we scale? Any model that we choose needs to be inclusive, generalizable, cost-effective, and sustainable. In order to change our institutions, we need to self-assess, taking a look at what resources exist, what's missing, and what's called institutional readiness. How ready is the institution to change, to adopt the stance of excellence through diversity? And all of this institutional data are critical, yet a universal challenge. The data that we use must be disaggregated so that we know we can understand what works for whom and under what conditions. The use of data, both quantitative and qualitative, can then be used to interrogate the narrative of success, which I contend is a false narrative, or a narrative that needs heavy-duty reworking. The approach to change matters. We should be focusing on issues rather than populations. In other words, if we focus on populations, we begin to think that there's something exceptional about that population that makes them not succeed or that makes others succeed. But what are the issues around persistence, retention, and success? We need to focus on advancing practice versus fixing our faculty and staff colleagues. A productive change model is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which talks about institutional change for all, and universal design to make sure that whatever we design in our classrooms, laboratories, advising sessions, in fact, is inclusive of individuals from all backgrounds. The value proposition matters. With them, the what's in it for me. There need to be incentives for people to change. Funding agencies can incentivize change by withholding funds unless the focus is inclusion. Also, in terms of our career advancement, promotion, and tenure, to what extent is equity and inclusion central or is it peripheral to advancing our careers? And fairness oftentimes comes up. And my question is, when do we start being fair? I mean, if we talk about the work that we've been doing as being unfair because, you know, special populations, in quotes, are getting all the attention. Well, when do we start being fair? How many hundreds of years ago do we go back to take a look at the history of unfairness? So the barriers to change abound, and I won't go through this list right here. It's not a complete list. The work is challenging, but worthwhile. And in fact, when we think about change, we need to look for inspirational words. And our 44th president, President Barack Obama, said the following: change will come if we wait. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. This is our challenge, and this is the work before all of us. Thank you.